All right, should we go ahead and get started? Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Shandali Vineyard. I'm a program officer at the Marine and Mike Mansfield Center. Welcome to this Mansfield Dialogue, our community education program providing public access to notable discussions on important international and civic issues. This afternoon's dialogue features Olga Aivazovska, Chair of the Board of Civil Network OPORA, calling in from Ukraine. Today we'll discuss Olga and OPORA Civil Network's work to ensure that elections in Ukraine are free, fair, and accountable by observing campaigns, training law enforcement officers, and continuing that work even in times of war. The Non-Partisan Mansfield Center advances ethical leadership, civic responsibility, and international understanding, values essential to strengthening American democracy, leadership, and national security. Rooted in the legacy of Mike and Maureen Mansfield, our dialogues work to foster civil exchanges of ideas from diverse viewpoints, reinforce the importance of democratic institutions, and examine the role that ethical values play in public life. Our speaker today will take questions from the audience following her presentation, so please do post your questions in the Q&A box. And I'm honored now to introduce our speaker, Olga. Welcome. Go ahead.
Hello to everyone. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure and honor to be here with you. And I hope that the audience will be very active during the Q&A session, because I hope to reach the important points of view about Ukraine from your side, not just share the information about the current status of Ukraine and electoral democracy and how it was started. So welcome for Q&A session activity, but first of all, I have 20-25 minutes for my introductory remark. And yes, OPORA was established many years ago. We are very big think tank, which was established after the Orange Revolution, when you might know that 22 years ago in Ukraine's electoral democracy was a huge challengeable period, because that presidential election had a huge fraud, and that's why it was switched the candidate who won that election, so-called won, and that's why millions of people became very active on the streets. And this peaceful protest changed the history, because without such type of civil activities, we might look like Belarus now, which had some opportunities to be more vocal as civil society during the period when authoritarian regime became much more powerful. And this is not happening once per month or during few days. It's already and usually the process which is very predictable when society doesn't want to play an active role into the governance, good governance, and building their democratic state from day to day, not just during elections and not just during E-Day, because the power of people's voices has to be powerful, and that's why people has to be vocal time to time. So I have to say that I was one of the co-founder of Civil Network OPORA. I was a very young student, and we believe that people's choice is the most important for free and fair elections in Ukraine. And when we saw that the fraud was so huge that it changed the result of elections, nobody from our small or then bigger community didn't have any, any period of misunderstanding how to be active. And many of us became members of electoral commissions, because during the first, second, and then third round, it was important to support the electoral process as co-organizers of that. And the part of opposition groups had opportunity to register candidates for the members of electoral commissions. The part of young people young generation became observers during this process, and the part of society became much more active when the fraud became visible. So OPORA was established after Orange Revolution, and the co-founder of this organization was very young students during the period when elections was going on in 2004. Then we understood that unfortunately there is no opportunity to build strong and sustainable democracy if you are active just time to time. That's why in 2006 we had free and fair parliamentary and local elections in Ukraine. But in 2010, the local elections was named by OPORA as not free and fair enough, because the violation of international standards and best practices were included on the level of legislation, not just on the level of practices and implementation of the legal base. So if you don't have the legal frame, which was developed according to the standards, it means that the passive and active electoral rights can be violated by organizers without any problem. That's why the first measure for free and fair elections, as for me, and as for lawyer, unfortunately, I have this destiny to become lawyer. That's why time to time I'm very boring. If there is no inclusive process of debates across the legal act, which will navigate and manage the process of preparation of elections, and then which will not working on the side of society how to defend political rights, then there is a huge opportunities for bad people to misuse these gaps or to misuse these norms against people's rights. Some years ago, the watchdog electoral organizations, NGOs, were named by as human rights defenders by UN on the level of UN. It means that our work is not political driven, it's human right driven, and that's why if you do not have opportunity to participate on active stage of the observation during electoral campaigning, but first of all, to be involved and to have capacity to propose legal norm for free and fair elections, your role will be much more weaker. But it means that in between elections, it has to be developed civil society institutions, think tanks with capacities to propose the positive norms or frame, legal frame for, sustainability of the electoral democracy or prevention the worst scenarios when the bad people will misuse again the gaps in some of the legal forms, which has to protect electoral rights, all people, all citizens and voters, not just specific groups. So after 2010, when we had a huge backlash in development of electoral democracy in Ukraine, OPORA published a statement which was only one voice, that we unfortunately have this backlash and these elections were not free and fair enough. And then our statement was used by international partners and international missions and foreign capitals, because all of them have to form the policy about such country as Ukraine if there are many questions about how this ruling party became leaders or how the transfer of power happened, where this society had opportunity against to participate according to constitution and best practices and international standards, or it was just managed by a very small group of people without possibility to have democratic track and democratic process. And this negative report, which was used even by your administration in Washington during that period, and Vice President Biden called to President Yanukovych and said that we see so many remarks and evidences that election day will have a huge problem with democratic standard, that maybe some of the capitals will not accept that results. And then our administration, led by President Yanukovych, stepped back from the basic plan. And that's why the worst scenario was not there. But of course, the democratic track was not perfect, as I described before, because even on the level of legislation, we had huge gaps. For example, administrations on the regional level, which was presented by ruling party and presidential branch of the power, misused the opportunity to deregister or cancel their registration of opposition candidates. And that's why they didn't have opportunity to participate on majority of the territories. It was local domestic elections all over Ukraine, because they didn't have opportunity to save their status as a candidate till election day. So after these awful elections, which was very bad comparatively to third round of 2004 presidential elections, or presidential elections in early 2010 or before parliamentary elections, we had enough evidences to mobilize society and to propose to work hard on reforms. Because if you do not have, again, the legislation or practices or form of realization of electoral rights, it means that elections will become just formal process without opposition or without positive secured norms for those who do not have enough money, who do not have access to administrative resources, who do not have physical support or support of law enforcement bodies. And for transition democracies, this is super important to have this positive frame. So after that awful elections, OPORA became one of the actors which was fighting for reforms. And we fighted for having guarantees. First of all, for candidates, do not be cancelled via registration from running on electoral process before election day. Their rights win guarantees on the legal base after our advocacy campaigning all over Ukraine and our physical participation as an experts in a special national working group, which was established after the negative report of election observers supported by international partners who've been cared about how Ukraine's democracy will be developing. Will it be sustainable, or everything will be depend on the, I don't know, moral position of the president? So the second huge progress which we did was huge specter of the rights for election observers. And I'm very proud because after these institutional changes on our legislation, we became a subject of electoral process. So civilians, civil citizens who've been registered as observers, independent observers from NGOs, got the right to not just monitor the situation and collect the data for nice reporting and publishing the articles, but we became legally the part of the process. That's why we've had opportunity to documentize electoral crimes, to prepare the claims to court, to become a subject of the court hearings. And we had opportunity to fight not just for realization of our rights as observers to observe the process, but for having free and fair elections. And each mistakes or each of the violation which we documentize had to be investigated by policemen and by prosecutors. That's why after 2012, when we got this huge part or list of the rights to participate on the electoral process as observers, not just formally, but legally, civil society observers group became very powerful in Ukraine. And after that, we had a huge switch from bad practices to good practices. But because each of the candidate and political party representative knows that if they will try to cut our rights somehow, or if they will fight with election observers during the process, then they might be punished even with a prisoning for 3 years. So it means that we became as much powerful as journalists because the violation of their professional rights is the same as violation of the rights of police in Ukraine. And then electoral observers from NGOs became such powerful too. So, but then we understood that it's not enough. It's not enough just to have muscles and to be vocal, to be loud, and to have power. You need to manage somehow with this power. So the next step was from OPORA side to start analyze why we have the problem with practices like we have different type of violations like voter bribery in campaigning, like violation of political advertising, like finance shadow money in politics, or financing the campaigning from thought sites and groups, which is not very transparent. Like electoral fraud with documentization, with ballots, protocols, and so on and so forth. Why we have just, documentized it for public? We need to have the process of transparent process and good mandate, positive mandate for law enforcement bodies and prosecutors how to investigate these type of crimes. Because if we are speaking about a very negative practice in post-Soviet Union region, it's about voter bribery, like people can pay money and to have big audience for their support. And this is not just for poor countries, relevant for poor countries. This is relevant for Hungary, for example. Just last month, it was elections. After 16 years in office, Prime Minister Orban, which was not very democratic person at all, which didn't follow in the best practices in elections, but civil society and investigative journalists investigated networks of voting bribery of poor people in this country, which was organized each time during different circles of elections in Hungary by this political group. So that's why not just populism was the baseline of the power of former Prime Minister Orban, but the physical money in politics, which been shared by the representatives of the party in different regions. And when journalists recorded the so-called network of bribery, because it's never happened from person to person. It's happening like pyramid. There is managers, there are organizers, there are friends who may propose you as a well-known person in their small community to take this small sum of money, and nothing will happen with you because this person has police and prosecutors under its power, or his power, sorry. And then when it's happening time to time regularly, it became a part of culture, which is not fine. So in our Ukraine's case, we had a problem with voter bribery and campaigning. And after numerous of different observation missions in Ukraine, which was organized by OPORA, we saw each and every gap in the process of investigation of voter bribery and campaigning, like no mandate for specific institutions, no clarity about how heavy is this crime, how important is to fight with it, what is the sanction against this crime. So, and that's why OPORA started to advocate changes to electoral code. And this electoral code, yes, and criminal code. So this criminal code and these changes which was voted by the parliament in 2020, 6 years ago, opened the opportunity for the people of goodwill, which are present everywhere, even in the police or in prosecutor offices, those people who are mission driven, who believe that they need to serve to people, and that's why during election they need to work effectively. And in 2020s, after the parliament positive role, when the parliament voted for these changes, which was developed by NGOs, by non-governmental institutions, and after awareness campaign, it became popular. That's why politicians had to follow these expectations from society that officials will fight with this very bad culture or part of very bad practices as voter bribery and campaigning. So, and after the changes of the legal base, we understood that it's not enough, unfortunately, because those who have to use these norms didn't have enough knowledge because it was in the first time in their history. And that's why OPORA developed the training course for the national police. And we've had more than 70,000 of students from police bodies who learn these norms, protocols, form of realization of these obligations from their side, instructions, and who each of them had leaflets and handbooks in each of the polling stations in 2020s. And that was the year when OSCE, ODIHR International Mission, which is very active in the European region, OSCE region, published their report after that election that it was the first time in Ukraine's history when police play positive role for free and fair elections. So now we have another era when again the role of civil society, non-governmental actors, horizontal diplomatic tracks is super important because we have huge war. And this is very good now that I have internet and I can speak with you. But unfortunately, time to time, this is very luxury. Like during the winter period, just few months ago, time to time, we didn't have energy and electricity during 23, 27 hours at our homes. That's why we had to equip ourselves. But this is not a big question for villages or small cities. This is a huge question for Kyiv, Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, for big cities in Ukraine, because you may not have access to internet or energy and use candles, but you can't have access to heating system or water if you don't have energy in modernized cities. So, which was the most difficult for us because we didn't have energy, we didn't have water, we didn't have heating system. And when the winter was so cold in the first time during 5 years, like minus 25 degrees by Celsius, I don't remember how much is it with Fahrenheit, but this is very cold winter. Time to time, the temperature at home was like plus 4 degrees by Celsius, which is unbelievably cold. So that's why now this is a period when we have to think about preparation for the first post-war elections, even during such hard period, potentially under the shelling or with huge challenges because of potentially terroristic attacks from Russia, or with potential huge input of FIMI, foreign interference, which might have different perspective, like cyber currency, voter bribery, manipulation with people's mind, misuse of social media, AI, and so on and so forth. And we are learning a lot from our neighbors' countries, which are under Russian political attack and interference too, and they are suffering because of that, because some of the political groups has a huge support of Russia, but it is not so visible for society. It is visible for experts, and that's why people are following bloggers which are producing very stupid decisions about populistic agenda of this political group. Please vote for them. We will be happy. We will live with the fairy tales in politics, but still. And then after the investigation of journalists or local domestic organizations, they have enough evidences that, unfortunately, that bloggers was paid by Russia, or that narratives was spreading via trolls, bots, via social media, and it became popular just because someone invested in huge resources into these narratives. The very vocal case is in Romania, when unknown person almost became a president, but then he did a stupid mistakes, which mean that they are not so smart as we expected. Or as we have to be ready to fight with. So this candidate, which was supported by Russia and shadow resources invested into the campaigning in Hungary, he published official or presented official financial report to the Central Election Commission with zero for political advertising in media, zero resources, which means that if you will investigate the reality, just screening the social media, and will see the amount of political advertising paid by someone, and then the report with zero from the candidate, the authority had a chance to use this opportunity of huge lie from the pro-Russian liar because of untransparency of political resources and electoral funding for that campaigning. We are looking what is happening in Moldova after the last elections, when they had to cancel the registration of Russian puppets which used Russian money officially, unlegally, but I mean openly, for having campaigning, when the leaders of this party had a meeting with Putin and then came with cash, with tons of cash for having campaigning in Moldova. That's why Moldovan authority had a chance to use this fraud with financial resources to stop the campaigning of this political party. For Ukraine, in our reality, it has to be synergy between civil society, authorities, international partners, to give Ukraine a chance to survive and to defend its own democracy, which had a very good score. Ukraine for many years had a huge problem with rule of law, unfortunately, and this is a huge shame, but I have to say that each and every high-level corruption scandals now are under the investigation, and many who've been involved into the local scandal now are in prisons. It means that anti-corruptional bodies in Ukraine are working well, but the fight with corruption is not very nice, and it can be done effectively, unfortunately, without bad news. So about bad people in the process. That's why now we are facing with very huge challenge for post-war Ukraine to build the capacity and infrastructure together, and our own capacity as the citizens to protect our democracy from FIMI in the future and local domestic bad guys in the process, and to give chance for society to vote according to and to form their political will according to their minds and values, not according to social media propaganda or AI algorithm. How it can be done? Unfortunately, during the war period, we can have elections or it will not be free and fair. But I'm very happy that we have the track with EU enlargement. So the membership of Ukraine in European Europe, this is a strategic goal because it's about economical resources. It's about human dimension. We have a lot of people out of Ukraine, and if Ukraine will be a member of EU, all European citizens, all citizens of EU have the same passports. So all of them are the citizens of EU, which means that these people who left Ukraine because of war might have the future in Ukraine or everywhere. Inside European Union. And of course, it's about defense sector. And this is about capacity to prevent the bigger war for future or the bigger aggression, because Ukraine has now capacity to fight for itself, even without US support. Unfortunately, I have to say that we lost the majority of support of your administration and your state. I hope it's not the final destination of this relationship. But still, during the last half a year, we had up and down moral position and moral attitude to many processes, but Ukrainians became much more self-manageable. And from the role of victims, which is true because we are suffering very much. I don't want to share the painful stories, but it's true, you can imagine. So Ukrainians became winners, because if you don't have enough resources for, I don't know, sorry, I forget the English wording. So if you don't have resources for having very good equipped armed forces of Ukraine, you need to create yourself and your own resources and your own equipment. And you know, the drones coalition with some of the representatives of EU is important, but Ukrainians are self-manageable, even with a huge number of issues during last half a year, very effectively. And if you watched the Russian parade in Moscow, you might understand the changes from the previous May. So it means that victory will not happen soon for Ukraine, but I'm sure that the scenario for Ukrainian people are more positive, even with this very difficult frame. So I have to say at the end, before your questions, I hope you will have it, or I continue to talk about something else. We have a plan about post-war elections together, like international organizations who have here huge of expertise, those who have values and those who have, first of all, good positive reputation. And there are a group of American organizations, European, some other international, and Ukrainian experts who are working hard now on the potential legal frame for the first post-war election, because with this huge list of challenges, we need to fight according to the standards, not physically. And then we have to work on very sensitive topics for the future election. This is political violence prevention. Because war is very traumatizing society, because we didn't have electoral process for the last 5 years plus. And that means that the culture of political dialogue transformed into something else under the pressure of Russian propaganda or social media advertising or negative campaigning, which we are watching on now as OPORA. We have monitoring even now, of social media narratives. And there are three topics which are very promoted by Russian sources and by Russian propaganda online. The first one is about potential clashes between different groups in society, like those who are living in Ukraine, those who left Ukraine, those who are living under Ukrainian government control, those who are stayed under the occupation, those who had the experience to be combatants or military, those who decided to try to not serve in armed forces of Ukraine, which is a problem for whole countries which had the war of attrition. It means that not the war during the weeks or days, but years. I have to remember for all of us that the war was started in February 2014, and the full-scale invasion with the missiles, ballistic rockets, and so on was started in February 2022. That's why the level of this war of attrition and the period of this war of attrition is longer already than Russia had during the Second World War. Just imagine. So from 2022 till now, the war between Russia and Ukraine is ongoing longer than Moscow had under the USSR period with enemies. So I have to say that this is a typical war of attrition, which is very problematic for society. And of course, there is a huge request to have political recovery, because Ukrainians are liking to debate. Ukrainians are very diverse on their views for the future. Ukrainians are very open to share their thoughts. Even with the experience of 70 years under the Moscow during the USSR awful period, we still are very open to debate about everything. And 5 years without elections is a little bit problematic because the political process is ongoing, but elections as a period of reloading of the power is not still there. Is it possible physically? No, unfortunately, because each inch of Ukraine, each day of the ongoing war can be under the attack by missiles and drones. Like last Wednesday in Kiev, against Kiev, we had 53 missiles and more than 400 drones. And we didn't sleep with my son from early late Wednesday till Thursday, because the attack was ongoing during 15 hours. So it means that you had attack during almost a whole day, and you can't even predict how long it will ongoing. And if during the period between 2014 and 2022, when the war had another scale, but it was still the war with victims and occupied territories, it was possible to predict which territories might be under the attack, because the most dangerous was for 30, 40, 50 kilometers, which might be under the attack within the artillery. Now, with fancy new modern drones, ballistic and rockets and missiles, each inch of Ukraine is under the potential attack. Just imagine if the elections will be started, but during the process, candidates will not have opportunity to have the meetings and big meetings, town hall meetings or something like that with the voters. More than 1 million of Ukrainians are mobilized into armed forces of Ukraine. More than 7 millions of Ukrainians are now abroad, and we, according to the current legislation, we might have just 104 polling stations abroad. How these people might to participate? We do not trust, unfortunately, for post-voting, as you have as a regular practice in Ukraine. And we are not going to use electronic voting because it's like the very useful door of influence or corridor of influence for Russians and Russian attacks. And that's why only physical voting of early voting and so on might help people to participate on electoral process from abroad. We have now more than 4.6 million of IDPs, internally displaced people. And of course, this is very challengeable, how to organize a process if you have 40% of your population were not living on the territories where they have formal registration, their homes, and so on and so forth. It might produce the problem for legitimacy of the final results if the half or total majority or even near the half population of Ukrainians will not have opportunity to participate. And the next challenge is a huge for election day, like if Russia will decide to organize terroristic attacks all over Ukraine or will use drones, then the turnout will be super low because people will decide to survive, not to vote. And then if the turnout will be low, just imagine what about legitimacy again. So the process, which doesn't have any opportunity to be and according to the best standards for post-war Ukraine is not possible at all. But again, during the Second World War, UK, Europe, London and others didn't have parliamentary elections during 10 years. And still, they've been democratic enough for building their democracy after this horrible war. I hope that Ukraine will follow the same track, and we as NGOs, think tanks, and many who are presenting the civil society in these countries, I'm sure will participate. And OPORA, just the last point, OPORA now is working on a few directions. First of all, this is development of the possible best practices on legislation, and we are developing with partners, with other stakeholders, the special legislation for the first post-war election, which has to solve the problem or regulate each challenge or each of the challenges which we see for the first post-war election. The next step is capacity building and growing the political culture, and that's why OPORA started to work with the multi-stakeholders groups, and we established the Academy of Electoral Integrity, and we have very successful and grateful alumni, and I hope that they will be a part of the community which will help to co-organize the first post-war elections, because they know what does it mean democracy, and all of them believe that democracy has direct connection with security. None of democratic country yet, or still, not fighting with each other, which is important still. And the third direction is prevention of FIMI, social media monitoring, and anti-violence or political violence campaigning, which means that we will have to work with this topic and to form the capacity of institutions to prevent political violence or to manage it if it will be a case already here. So thank you very much. I hope you have some questions.
Thank you, Olga. That was so interesting, and thank you for such a interesting presentation. Audience, you can put your questions in the Q&A box. I'll go ahead and ask one of our first questions. Okay, so Olga, if a referendum was held in Ukraine now on the status of Ukrainian territory, perhaps ceding land, what do you think the general sentiment of Ukrainian voters would be?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much for this question. And I see that you want to know the position of society, not just my personal. But I have to say that we have consensus here, like no elections during wartime and half a year for preparation. And we have enough public surveys and representative data that people are again this referendum about territories, or not the referendum, but again the norms which might give a chance to give these territories for Russia. This is a consensus in Ukraine society. I don't have now the presentation for you with the survey result, but you can find it. You can use Google and you will find it for sure. The majority of Ukraine society doesn't want to have any peace deal with the question of territories. I can describe why, if you wish. The question is not just about territories. People under the occupation are living in prisons, physically, morally. And if you will listen in the interview of those who left that territories, you will see how horrible is this life. I don't think that there is more horrible life than under the occupation. I have to say that from the again military point of view, the give up of these territories means that we will give not the territories but the positions of the militaries who are defending another territories behind them, another towns and cities and communities. And I know that it was debate in the Congress, one of the committee, and it was a great presentation with analysis how this front line looks like, not the kill zone, so-called kill zone, because now it's a kilometers with the kilometers where there are drones and representative of Russian armed forces and Ukraine are mixed. This is not a line where there is no representatives of both armies. It doesn't look like it was before, according to historical knowledges about tactics of the war. It changed a little bit, let's say like that. So, and territories, it's mean that Ukrainians under the Ukrainian government control will have Russian armed forces closer, because then we had not the just front line, we had equipment or special lines which prevented another occupation of another territories. And someone tabulated even how many years do Russia need for occupation of Ukraine, of all Ukraine. With the current activities, it has to spend more than 92 years. So, and near the million of Russian soldiers has to live their lives on the ground of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast for whole occupation of this territory. This is a huge price. So why Ukraine has to give up and to give them a chance to occupy more territories of Ukraine and to save their soldiers' lives and to do not prevent the worst scenario for other land of Ukraine, other towns and cities and villages. Because again, territory is not the empty land. This is towns, cities where there are people with their children. So sorry, but there is a total consensus here. Ukrainians are the first nation who wants to have peace deal, because this is super important, because this is not a film for us, not a movie. This is daily base issue. But again, we need to rationalize the topic about territories, because it's not symbolic at all. It will produce huge challenges, even weaknesses for defense system of Ukraine, for other communities and towns of Ukraine. And it will save the resources of Russian armed forces for continue their aggression against Ukrainian citizens all over Ukraine, and maybe against, again, Lithuania and Poland, which is a question now because Belarus is activating. You might know about these challenges. Okay, next question.
Yeah. So, do you see a direct link between the fairness of the elections or lack thereof in 2012 and 2010 to the
Mhm.
initial invasion of Crimea in 2014, either at a national level or locally in Crimea?
Thank you for this question. I think that partially yes, partially not, because it was not about quality of the process. Again, the presidential election in 2010 was free and fair when Yanukovych won. The local domestic elections in October the same year was very awful, was awful and undemocratic as for me. And in 2012, the party of region tried to monopolize the power and to have as weak opposition as it possible and as less the seats in the parliament as it possible. That's why the power of this authoritarian region leader became much more, sorry for this word, and much more powerful than before. And Yanukovych was pro-Russian, and he was loyal to Russia. That's why war was not provoked by, pro-Western leader which decided to, I don't know, to become Ukraine as a NATO member or EU member. No, at all. And without this revolution of dignity in 2013, 2014, Ukraine could be a Belarus already, without freedom, without rights, with a very difficult situation for the majority of society, and they will be misused against Ukraine in this war for sure, or against NATO country. But still, I think that Crimea happened because we have just few days of very huge weaknesses of the power groups and ruling groups and institutions. When Yanukovych left, all government of party of region under the Yanukovych left, and this gap of power produced not the strategy but opportunity to use the developed strategy of Russia in Moscow against Ukraine and for having Crimea under the occupation. All the intelligence services, not only from public sources in Ukraine, you can investigate it broadly. You can use different data from EU countries, which was public, like from Ministry of Defense of Estonia, for example, and other services. That Russia wanted to have the Crimea under their power, and Russia just used the window of opportunity for implementation of the strategy which was developed before. That's why the legitimacy of the power, that's why the quality of the power, that's why the readiness to react effectively during very short-term window of opportunity for the enemy is super important. And my personal view that the weak reaction of the Western partners after the occupation of Crimea provoked the broader possibility of Russia to continue aggression against Ukraine. That's it. Because Russia understood that after the occupation of Crimea, after the Helsinki Final Act, after the Second World War, territorial integrity doesn't matter at all, because against Russian authorities, Russian president is a guy which has still contacts with the world leaders. Nobody punished him. Nothing was happening with the serious sanctions before MH17 was destroyed by Russian armed forces in Ukraine, and when EU citizens were killed there. So I have to say that even the sanctions from Western countries after the occupation of Crimea was not very active. And that's why Donbass happened. So Crimea became not pro-Russian. Crimea was occupied by Russians with very pro-Russian President Yanukovych, who gave them a chance to continue to prolong the agreement between the Russian fleet in Crimea and Ukrainian government, because Russian fleet had to leave Ukrainian territories in 2017. And in 2010, when Yanukovych became president, he adopted few very pro-Russian decisions. So the first one was to prolong the agreement with Russia about Crimea and about Russian fleet there. And the second one to change the constitution and to back to constitution before elections in 2004, when the power of president was so huge. And I have to say that, again, we did a wrong choice. I didn't vote for Yanukovych for sure, but the majority of society did a wrong choice. But the opponent was Yulia Tymoshenko, which didn't have very pro-Western position too. So maybe Ukrainian citizens didn't have enough choices in 2010. That's why those who've been mobilized to vote during election day, again, voted both groups for not very pro-Western parties, not very pro-Western presidents. And again, Russia had a strategy about Ukraine. Russia never expected that Ukraine will follow the Western direction and that Ukrainians wanted to have the choice and follow this choice by themselves. Sometimes we are doing mistakes, but unfortunately, Barack Obama and some other Western leaders did the mistakes too in 2014 when they didn't react effectively on Syria and misuse of chemical weapons against civilians in Syria, which was supported by Russia too. We have even the same generals with the same surname, which are very known in Syria and in Ukraine. That's why the global power of this authoritarian regime and misusing of military capacity was awful. And that's why our mistakes are on our side. But the mistakes of Western countries and Western partners has to be there too. So sorry if I'm very tough, but I'm very direct. My English is very poor. That's why my language is not very diplomatic. To help Ukraine in 2026. Thank you so much for this question. Yeah, thank you for
our last question. Yeah.
So much for this question. I have to say that your society can help Ukraine to still continue following the processes here, which is important, to have positive rating, because all politicians are rating followers. They are looking what is the public opinion in democratic countries. And that's why both sides, like Democrats, Republicans, who will support Ukraine even vocally, even politically, without financial investment, will support Ukraine very much and will help to again to be stronger during this war of attrition. I'm sure that the Russian power is not endless, and Russia doesn't have resources to have this war during the decades. That's why, with support of your opinion, people's opinions, which has to be visible according to surveys, your leadership can do not have any attention on Ukraine and can't be too much pro-Russian. I have to say that too, because sometimes business is just business, and I'm speaking about people's lives, which can be sale for sure.
Well, thank you, Olga. I want to respect your time. If you want to address either of the last two questions, you can, but otherwise we can close.
Yeah, I see another questions, but of course we can end or just take a few minutes, like 5 minutes more, and I can be little bit less local. Yeah. So about history, 250 years of history.
Yeah, I think this question, considering what's happening in the United States now under our current administration, do you have any thoughts on what you would say about our democracy under threat?
Yeah, I believe that both of our sides have the same interest to have rule of law in our countries, do not have corruption, especially political corruption, to fight effectively with it, and to promote people's choices. And that's why the question is about mobilization of the people of goodwill to be active during the political stage. So I don't know what to add, because your elections is your elections. I can advise you here. But of course, those who do not believe in the future and will not take responsibility to vote, they will be out of the history. So I hope that the people of goodwill in your country will thinking about your future and will monitor all mistakes of your administration, which are very visible and which is not about our future, which is about your future. And thank you for you are listening me, because I'm sure this is not the top priority, but still this is important to know that there are some people who are willing to know what is happening and what was happening with Ukrainian democracy and electoral processes in Ukraine. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you for such a insightful and timely conversation and for sharing your experiences. And I think we're all hoping for your safety, and our thoughts are with you. And thank you to our audience for joining us and caring about these issues and Olga's experiences.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me and for this invitation. It was unexpected but very pleasant. So I'm always ready to speak about election observation and the role of civil society, because it's huge. The role is very huge, but it is happening only when the people are ready, again, to take responsibility and to invest your thoughts, minds, brains, professionalism into this work. So thank you so much and good luck with your observation or other activities. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.